You're standing on the Cestius Bridge. The Tiber flows dark beneath you. A man kneels naked on the stones, hands bound, and before him sits something that shouldn't exist in the same Spesa leather sack, moving. Inside, a dog, a rooster, a monkey, and a viper, all alive, all waiting. They beat him first. Blood-red rods tear his back into ribbons. Then they force him inside with the animals and sew it shut while he screams. The dog's teeth find his ribs. The monkey claws at his face. The snake strikes again and again. And while he drowns in his own agony, they hurl the sack into the river. Cicero himself explained it. Let him be denied sky, sun, water, and earth. This was Rome. This was justice. This was called ponekolatha, punishment of the sack. Before we go deeper, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Me genuinely amazes me that a punishment from 101 BC can reach someone halfway across the world right now. In your language, on your screen. This isn't folklore. It appears in the 12 Tables, Rome's oldest legal code. Dating to 450 BC, the sack was reserved for parricides, those who murdered their own parents. But it was only one method in an arsenal designed not just to kill, but to destroy. The body, the spirit, the memory itself. You've heard of the gladiators. You've seen the Colosseum in films. But what Rome did outside the arena, in the shadows of law and ritual, makes those spectacles look merciful. Today, you'll witness 12 punishments so methodical, so symbolic, that even their documentation feels like a confession Rome wished it could take back. The question isn't whether these things happened. The question is why a civilization that gave us law, engineering, and philosophy needed torture so elaborate it required architects. Let's begin where Rome began, with betrayal. The Tarpeian rock stood 80 feet above the Roman Forum. At the southern summit of the Capitoline Hill, you could see it from the Senate, from the markets, from everywhere power gathered. It was named after Tarpeia, a young woman who, according to legend, opened Rome's gates to the Sabines in exchange for gold. They crushed her beneath their shields instead, teaching Rome its first lesson. Betrayal has a geography, and it ends at the edge of a cliff. From that moment forward, traitors were brought here. Not to a dungeon, not to a gallows hidden from view. To the cliff, in daylight, where citizens could watch. The procedure was almost insultingly simple. No ceremony, no final words, just a push. And then the body shattered on the rocks below, bones splitting like kindling, blood pooling where senators walked to work. Livy records that in 384 BC, Marcus Manlius Capitolinus, once a hero who saved Rome from a Gallic invasion, was hurled from that same rock. His crime wasn't theft or cowardice. It was ambition. He had spoken of kingship, and Rome, still haunted by the tyrant kings it had overthrown, could not allow even the dream of monarchy to survive. So they threw him from the place he had once defended. The symbolism was surgical. The hero became the traitor, and the rock became his final monument. Archaeological evidence suggests the area beneath the cliff accumulated so many bodies over centuries that it required periodic clearing. Emperor Claudius, according to Seneca, attended these executions personally. He took what Seneca called perverse pleasure in observing how the bodies landed, which bones broke first, which limbs bent at unnatural angles. But the Tarpeian rock was reserved for Roman citizens who betrayed their own. For those Rome considered beneath citizenships, flaves, pirates, rebels, there was something far slower. Crucifixion was so brutal that Roman law explicitly exempted citizens from it. This was a punishment for the other. The condemned would first be scourge-whipped with leather straps embedded with bone shards and metal balls until their backs were unrecognizable. Then they were forced to carry the crossbeam, the patibulum, through the streets to the execution site. Many collapsed under its weight. The crowd spat on them. Children threw stones. At the site, executioners drove iron nails through the wrist knot, the palms, which would tear in through the ankles. the cross was raised, and then the waiting began. Death came from exhaustion and asphyxiation. To breathe, you had to push up on the nails in your feet. Eventually, your legs gave out. Your lungs filled with fluid. You drowned in your own body. It could take hours, sometimes days. Roman executioners developed a small wooden seat called a settle that prevented victims from suffocating too quickly, extending the agony for maximum visibility. Seneca, who witnessed many crucifixions, wrote, "I see crosses there, not just of one kind, but made in many different ways. Some have their victims with head down to the ground, some impale their private parts, others stretch out their arms." The most infamous mass crucifixion occurred in 71 BC, after the slave rebellion led by Spartacus was crushed. General Marcus Licinius Crassus ordered 6,000 captured rebels crucified along the Appian Way, the main road from Rome to Capua. For 200 kilometers, travelers passed thousands of dying men. Their screams formed a corridor of sound. Plutarch recorded that the bodies remained on their crosses until they rotted away, a warning that persisted long after the voices stopped. The message was unmistakable. This is what becomes of those who raise arms against Rome. But what about Rome's own soldiersmen who wore the eagle and swore the oath when they failed? The word decimation comes from the Latin decimus, meaning 10th. When a Roman legion showed cowardice, mutiny, or catastrophic failure, the entire unit faced collective punishment. Soldiers were divided into groups of 10. Each group drew lots. The man who drew the shortest straw was beaten to death by the other 9. Not by strangers, not by executioners. By his brothers, the men he had trained with, fought beside, shared meals with, for years. They used clubs and stones. They were ordered to make it slow, to make it loud. The centurion Titus Pullo described it as a lesson written in blood that no soldier ever needed twice. One of the most documented cases occurred in 71 BC, the same year as Spartacus. Defeat when a legion under Mummius engaged the rebels against orders and was routed. Crassus revived this ancient punishment, which had fallen out of common use. 500 men died that day at the hands of their comrades. Their screams echoed across the camp as a lesson to the remaining legions. The military writer Frontinus noted that units which survived decimation often became Rome's fiercest fighters in subsequent battles, desperate to redeem themselves and eliminate the stigma. The poet Lucan captured the horror. Chance became the arbiter of doom, and on the hazard of the lot depended death. Some soldiers chose suicide rather than participate in killing their friends. Others formed blood pacts, pledging not to survive if one of their group drew the fatal lot. Desperate attempts to preserve humanity within an inherently dehumanizing system. But decimation, as terrible as it was, still offered 9 out of 10 soldiers survival. For individual failures, Rome had devised something with no escape at all. Fustuarium, the punishment of the clubs, awaited soldiers who abandoned their posts, lost their weapons, or showed individual cowardice. Every man he had served beside was forced to witness. The tribune would touch him lightly with a cudgel, a ceremonial signal. Then every soldier fell upon him with clubs and stones. The military writer Vegetus noted that this punishment created such terror that facing the enemy in battle became less frightening than the certainty of death at the hands of one's own comrades. Polybius, writing in the 2nd century BC, described the aftermath. Even those who manage to escape are not saved thereby. They are not allowed to return to their homes, and none of their family would dare receive such a man. The public nature was crucial. It forced soldiers to participate in the killing, binding them through shared guilt. After witnessing or delivering such brutality, desertion became unthinkable. Pause here. We've covered 4 methods: traitors thrown from cliffs, rebels crucified by thousands, soldiers beating their brothers to death in decimation, individual cowards clubbed by their entire legion, and we're only beginning. The Colosseum's underground network, the Hypogeum, contained 32 animal pens and 80 vertical shafts. Trapdoors allowed beasts and condemned prisoners to appear suddenly in the arena, creating entrances that seemed magical to the roaring crowd above. These executions were often staged as mythological reenactments. A criminal might be dressed as Orpheus, given a lyre, and promised that his music could soothe the wild beasts. The mauling became a grotesque parody of the original myth. The poet Martial witnessed such spectacles and praised them. What was mere fable when performed on stage becomes reality in our arena. During Emperor Trajan's celebration of his Dacian victories in 107 AD, games lasted 123 days. 11,000 animals were killed, alongside thousands of condemned criminals and prisoners of war. Vendors sold wine and snacks. Children watched from their parents' shoulders. People placed bets on how long each victim would scream. This was lunch entertainment. Equally theatrical, but perhaps more terrifying, was viva crematio, burning alive. Emperor Nero elevated it to performance art during his persecution of Christians following the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. His executioners coated victims in wax and pitch to make them burn more slowly and brightly. Tacitus describes the scene. Mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt to serve as nightly illumination when daylight had expired. These human torches illuminated Nero's gardens while he drove his chariot among them, simultaneously playing executioner, audience, and performer, transforming a place of martyrdom into Christianity's most sacred ground. For crimes requiring spectacular destruction, Rome employed pulveratio death by crushing. Elephants, trained to kill with agonizing precision, became instruments of exotic punishment. Pliny the Elder described their capabilities. They can be taught to walk ropes, to throw missiles, and even to kill on command, crushing a man limb by limb as directed by their handler. This controlled destruction allowed executions to be prolonged for maximum entertainment. Thousands of pounds of pressure. During the Punic Wars, Carthaginian generals faced death beneath the very war elephants they had once commanded against Rome. The writer Aelian recorded one execution that went spectacularly wrong. The crowd, moved by this display of animal loyalty, demanded the man's pardon. Emperor Claudius reluctantly granted it, demonstrating how even execution as entertainment could sometimes yield unexpected mercy. But for those Rome truly wanted to erase, physical death was insufficient. They needed to destroy something more fundamental: memory itself. Damnatio memorial, condemnation of memory, struck at what Romans feared more than death: oblivion. When the Senate decreed this punishment, it ordered the systematic erasure of the condemned from history. Statues would be destroyed or recarved with new faces. Names were chiseled from inscriptions. Wills were invalidated. Even mentioning the person's name became illegal. The poet Horace captured Roman obsession with legacy. Non omnis moriar, shall not wholly die. Damnatio memoria sought to extinguish precisely this hope. Emperor Domitian suffered this fate after his assassination in 96 AD. The Senate ordered his statues destroyed, his name scratched from public monuments, his coins melted down. Officials meticulously worked to remove all trace of his existence, as if he had never ruled Rome at all. Archaeological evidence of this erasure remains visible today. In the Roman Forum, inscriptions bearing Domitian's name show clear evidence of deliberate damage. The paradox is haunting. We know about these erased individuals precisely because the effort to remove them was so thorough it became noteworthy. The conspicuous absence became a presence of its own. Now we return to where we began, but with the full horror revealed. Pona culatha, punishment of the Saquas reserved almost exclusively for parricides. For Romans, this crime represented the ultimate betrayal of pietas, the sacred duty owed to one's family and ancestors. The ritual was ancient, codified in the 12 tables. The condemned would first be beaten with blood-red rods. Then they were sewn into a leather sack alongside 4 symbolic animals: the dog for shamelessness, the rooster for arrogance, the monkey for malice, and the viper for venomous hatred. This macabre ensemble would then be thrown into the Tiber River or the sea. The punishment denied the condemned contact with the fundamental elements of creation: no earth for burial, no air to breathe, no water to drink. Symbolically removed from the sun's light upon being sealed in the sack. Cicero, arguing a famous parricide case, explained the philosophy. They wanted him unable to have sky, sun, water, or earth, so that he who killed the one who gave him life should be deprived of all those things from which all living things derive. The punishment created a perverse new family for the condemned in death-trapped for eternity with beasts rather than the honored ancestors he had betrayed. While Ponicale emerged from Roman tradition, Scaphism represented torture the Romans adopted from the Persians. It was reserved for crimes that endangered the entire commotion, sacrilege against religious sites, or betrayal of military secrets. The condemned would be stripped naked and fastened between 2 boats or hollowed logs with head, hands, and feet protruding. They would be force-fed milk and honey until developing severe diarrhea. Then their exposed skin would be coated with honey to attract insects. Left floating on a stagnant pond, unable to move, covered in their own excrement. The condemned would be slowly consumed by insects while still alive. Death could take weeks. Plutarch described the execution of a soldier named Mithridates by this method, noting he survived an astonishing 17 days before death finally claimed him. The mere threat of Scaphism was often enough. When Emperor Aurelian captured Queen Zenobia of Palmyra after her rebellion in 270 AD, he threatened her with this fate. The normally defiant queen immediately submitted to Roman authority, choosing comfortable exile over such horror. Fire has always held dual symbolism as both purifier and destroyer. Romans employed this duality in mors per ignum lentum, death by slow fire. Unlike simple burning, which could be mercifully quick. This punishment deliberately prolonged suffering through careful temperature control. The condemned might be placed in a bronze bowl, suspended over low flames, gradually roasted on a metal grid, or partially immersed in boiling oil. In the Roman colony of Lugdunum, modern Lyon in 177 AD, the Christian martyr Blandina was roasted on an iron chair over carefully controlled flames as part of public games. Witnesses recorded that she remained conscious and speaking throughout much of the ordeal. The jurist Ulpian classified death by fire as summum supplicium, the ultimate punishment, and recommended it particularly for arsonists, poisoners, and practitioners of magic. Perhaps most psychologically terrifying was the punishment reserved for Vestal Virgins who broke their vows: live burial. The procedure was elaborate and deeply symbolic. The condemned priestess would be dressed in funeral attire and transported in a covered litter to the Campus Celeratus, the field of transgression near the Colline Gate. There she would be placed in a small underground chamber provisioned with minimal food, water, a lamp, and a bed. The provisions served an important legal fiction. Technically, Rome was not executing the Vestal, but creating conditions where she would die naturally, thereby avoiding divine pollution from directly harming a consecrated priestess. Once sealed in this chamber, the Vestal was left to choose between ending her own life quickly or enduring slow death by starvation in absolute darkness. The most famous victim was the chief Vestal Cornelia, condemned by Emperor Domitian in 91 AD, despite her protestations of innocence. As she was led to her living tomb, Pliny the Younger recorded she maintained perfect dignity. Even when her dress caught on the ladder leading down, and the executioner offered his hand, she recoiled, preserving her purity even in her final moments. She continued calling upon the gods, saying, "Caesar thinks me unchaste high, who have performed sacred rites while he triumphed and ruled." Archaeological excavations near the Colline Gate have uncovered small chambers consistent with historical descriptions. some containing remains of female skeletons alongside oil lamps and deteriorated food vessels. We have seen how Rome perfected punishment as spectacle and control. Traitors thrown from cliffs, rebels crucified by thousands, criminals torn apart by beasts, heretics burned alive, enemies crushed, erased, or buried in darkness. As Seneca warned, those who punish for a living learn to enjoy the act itself. Today, the Colosseum is admired as engineering. Tourists smile where 50,000 once screamed for blood. Yet its tunnels still echo with iron gates, roaring beasts, and condemned footsteps on stained sand. Rome's cruelty was not about justice. It was about obedience, training citizens to fear power and accept violence as normal. That is the true warning carved into the ruins. We didn't end this tradition. We refined it and hid it better.